Growing up in the United States, it was like living in a very schizophrenic country. On the one hand, it was a country that was based on the genocide and oppression of a Native American population. On the other hand, it was a country which had revolted against the colonial regime of the British. And it was a country which had tried for a social, at least, if not an economic democracy. My growing up in Atlanta, Georgia was something like Stepford Wives meets The Matrix meets Disney World. That's if you're white. It was different if you're black. Now, I've just been speaking with Vincent Lavery, who's here with us today, who ran for Congress in the United States, although he's an Irish citizen as well, ran for Congress on the Democratic ticket 4 times. And he tells me, having been back in America after 2 months, after living there since 1956, that this is the most important election at the midterm since World War II. Even looking at 68 and 72, this is a very important election because it's being fought on the international issue of the war on Iraq. Usually they're fought on the basis of domestic issues, health, jobs, whatever people are concerned about in their daily lives. The Korean War slipped by in America as the forgotten war. It was a war that nobody knew about when it was happening. In 1958, the U.S. entered Vietnam. Who knew? In 1968, after 10 years of war, 80% of Americans still could not find Vietnam on a map. And it took another 7 or 8 years for the Vietnamese to pursue their victory at last, and for the anti-war movement and the American military resistance to find some common ground. Now, this has happened a bit faster in the United States now. While George Bush and his cronies in the neoliberalist New American Century did not learn from Vietnam, the American people did. It seems slow, but it's still much faster than the reaction before. At the outset of the war, even after a 9/11 attack by someone on the continental United States, 24% of the population opposed the war. There were marches against the war in New York before the war even started. And now 60% oppose the war. Bush's popularity is down to about 35%, which has been pointed out is lower than Nixon's at the height of the Vietnam War. In March of this year, the corrupt and now indicted criminal DeLay controlled Congress and would not allow an official hearing to be held on impeachment and war crimes. Can you hear me? Something's happened to the mic. Okay. In response to this, about 50 Democrats and 2 Republicans attended a mock hearing in the basement of the House of Representatives to discuss impeachment of Bush and charging Rumsfeld, Rice, and others with international crimes, war crimes of a high order. Yes, this is a very good thing. And this was broadcast on C-SPAN. Now, not everybody, of course, in America gets C-SPAN, but it was broadcast. Now, on the elections themselves, very briefly, there are 33 of 100 Senate seats up for grabs at the moment. That's 1/3 every 6 years. This could easily result in a tie or in a majority of 1. If there's a tie, it means that Vice President Cheney will have to personally vote to cast a deciding vote on most issues. In the House, all 435 seats are up for election. The Democrats only need 15 seats to gain a majority. Now, if the Democrats do get a majority in the House, there's going to be a considerable pressure on them to do something. Now, there's the potential to bring impeachment and charges of international war crimes against the current administration. An administration which has brought us preemptive wars, which has brought us a police state, which has brought us legitimations of torture, including the recommended torture in some cases of children in front of their parents, which has brought us people being held in prison without charge, which has brought us expansion of military bases, expansion of weapons development, collaborations with Israel to attack people who were innocent of any crime. And the Americans are reacting against this. The left is not totally connected into the political process. Many of us do not believe it works. Other people do want to give it one more chance, but we're coming up to last chance. In the age of global warming and climate change, we aren't going to have many more chances to turn the world around. And America has to be a big part of what's turning around. Now, one good sign, for example, in the recent June primary, there was a Democratic Senator, Joe Lieberman. He'd been representing Connecticut for 18 years. He was defeated because of his support for the Iraq War. So Democrats now will have an opportunity, a very short window of time, to make these major changes. If they don't, it will become clear to everyone that the Republicans and Democrats are two sides of the same coin, and the system as we've known it in America is defunct. We've confronted a number of problems. For example, when the military-industrial complex was warned about by Eisenhower, just about 2 minutes, when this was warned about by Eisenhower, it's gotten very much worse. Statistics show that 432 of the 435 congressional districts have now been made to depend mainly on war materials for their economy, on military bases and the production of armaments. Political and economic corruption is rife. Electoral fraud brought this political coup d'etat into existence in the first place in 2000. They're building a big fence to keep the Mexicans out. I hope the Americans realize a fence can also keep Americans in. Racism and genocide is the basis of the wars in the world today for economic benefit. People are being murdered so that companies and corporations can make a profit. And I'm hoping that Americans will show in this coming election they're not prepared to go along with that anymore. War should now be obsolete. We should not be building up police states. In this age of global warming, we need international respect and cooperation. We need a real UN. We don't need global war. And this is the basis of the future war. Water will be the new oil unless we turn the world around now. We don't want to be fighting over water. We want to share the resources. And I'm hoping these American elections will give us some chance for growth in that area, which badly needs it. Thank you.
Yes. It's my honor and a pleasure to be here, and I should like first and foremost to thank the Irish anti-war movement for giving me this rare opportunity to come to this lovely country. It's a really lovely country. I just want to talk about, with some limitations, about certain definitions that we have always been occupied with, especially in this part of the world. And it's good that the introduction that has been given to me talks about this propaganda and the distorting image and continuous labeling for certain freedom fighters and resistance movement and putting them as terrorists. I would say, if we don't, just like a beginning, if we don't fight, if we don't collaborate and fight in the peaceful means, because it's not to go to a fight or to start a war, because we're anti-war as well. But sometimes when you are under occupation, when you are humiliated, it's your basic natural right. It's the international law, it's the human law that gives you every right to resist and to fight back for your dignity, for your integrity, for your independence, and for your liberation and protection. For the recent war that took place in Lebanon during the July-August 2006, they tell you Hezbollah started this fight. How? They kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers. Wrong. Hezbollah does not make wars. Hezbollah is a resistance movement. And if you want to cast a look into the Lebanese history starting from 1948 to 1965, such a long period of time where we have never witnessed any kind of resistance. But of course we have witnessed the horrible and the tragic occupation of Palestine and the onset of the whole crisis of the Middle East and the region. Because the root cause of the problem in Lebanon, in Syria, in Palestine, in Jordan, in Egypt, is the Israeli occupation to Palestine. It started with Palestine in 1948, and it continues. All of the other things, the occupation of the Sinai Desert in Egypt, the Golan Heights in Syria, the South Lebanon, they were all consequences and repercussions of what happened in Palestine, because the international community was asleep then. They was collaborating and giving the upper hand to the Israelis to do what they did. And this still continues up till today. So when we talk about war, we talk about Israel. When you talk about Hezbollah, you talk about resistance. Israel has always been the aggressor, the occupier, the invader, the encaver, the massacre doer, the children killer. And when you talk about Hezbollah, you talk about the freedom fighter, the defender, the protector, and the peace seeker and the peacemaker as well. We have been engulfed with a very serious problem in Lebanon. The Israelis, just to take the line back of history, in 1948, I was talking about 1948 to 1965, where we have never witnessed any kind of resistance. The Israelis violated our sovereignty in maritime and in air and in ground. And it's good that she mentioned something about the water. Lebanon is a sovereign state, that has never been allowed to make use of its water. They've always talked about Lebanon as a Switzerland of the Middle East, as a heaven that has a lot of waters, but the Israelis prevented us even to build a dam to make use of the Litani River in the south. And I believe this name would ring a bell in your mind, because the Israelis were saying, mostly, we're going to reach Litani River. In certain places in South Lebanon, it's only 5 kilometers away from the border. They couldn't push an inch there because Hezbollah was there. I believe that we have to understand what's really going on there. This operation of Hezbollah to take 2 Israeli captives has been done to retrieve Lebanese hostages that has been there in the Israeli jails for more than 28 years. Hezbollah said after the Israeli withdrawal, after Hezbollah was successfully able to enforce and to impose on the Israelis to withdraw from South Lebanon in the year 2000, there are still stalemate, there are things that we have to define. The Shib'a occupied farms, the crisis of the Lebanese hostages in the Israeli prisons, you have to release them. And Hezbollah has been saying, if you really don't want us to carry operations to arrest soldiers of yours, okay, do with them, release them, drop this alibi from our hands, withdraw from Shib'a farms, whether they are Syrians or Lebanese. They are not Israeli occupied, they are not Israeli territories. So you have to withdraw. And then if the Lebanese government says that this is not a Lebanese territory, we will not continue to fight in Shib'a farms. It is in the Lebanese new government ministerial statement that Hezbollah has the right to continue to fight after the year 2000 to liberate the occupied territories of Shib'a farms and to secure the release of the Lebanese hostages in Israeli prisons. And this is what happened in the July 12. And after that, Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah came out directly 2 hours after the operation to say, we have done this before. Hello Israelis, we have done this before. We have made this exchange, we have made this swap. You have bowed to your knees. It's the time again to do it because we have given enough chance. This is a limited operation in time and space. We don't want any destabilization for the situation. We want indirect negotiations, just like the past times, and a swap of the prisoners. What they responded? They sent their American F-16 warjets to bombard the bridges, to kill the civilians, and it was a large-scale war, and it was a premeditated war. If anybody tells you other than that, he is lying. I want to say something about this war. The whole problem of this war starts with the international community, with the hypocrisy, the inconsistency, the double standards. You have first-class citizens and second-class citizens. You have first world and second world and third world. Who says that? It's the savage capitalism that makes that a situation and a reality that we have to deal with. It's the problem with the take your time. And this is something that I want to share with. Take your time American policy, and here I refer you to something that was written in one of the Israeli papers. Take your time is the headline summarized American policy, but it also constituted an unintended indictment for crimes against humanity. Take your time with the terror bombing, firing, American Tau Hellfire Valley Maverick Standard missiles against civilians in Kana, in Marwahin, and the different villages of South Lebanon. Take your time using American missiles and 155mm artillery rounds, 4 types of US cluster bombs, and ammunitions and arsenal of weapons against convoys of fleeing refugees in vehicles filled with terrified families, and to destroy homes and apartment buildings housing civilians and hospitals and the poor in Beirut. Take your time, because Israel's actions are the birth pangs of the new Middle East, in destroying or damaging 134 bridges, 94 roads, art schools, memories, playgrounds, agriculture, children's toys in their bedrooms, books, photographs, hope, gasoline stations, airports, seaports, wheat silos, a dairy factory, vehicles with medical supplies. Take your time with American weapons in your service as you pulverize shelters, leaving the charred bodies of small children in the arms of parents buried under the debris. Take your time, because Bush, State Department, Defense Department told Israel, you can use our weapons against nearly 1 million Lebanese refugees as they flee their homes, exposed to hunger, disease, and death. Take your time. A majority of US Congress repeated as they stumbled over each other, jockeying for good position in line for Israeli lobby cash to fund their upcoming midterm elections. Many in Israel and America recognize this. Israeli journalist Yaron Levy speaks of an Israeli society in moral collapse. He says and he writes about the Israeli madness and insane brutality, and he says a country like this cannot continue and cannot survive because it's a gang of hoodlums. The world appealed, and there was a worldwide appeal for a ceasefire, and it could have been done. But it was the United States, it was President Bush and Condoleezza Rice, saying we have to take the time. Take your time. It's the Lebanese people that are being killed. It's the innocent and the children, and Israel should prevail. This is what they always said. And Bush always tells us that he will prevail and the United States will prevail. I believe they failed, they pre-failed, and they post-fail as well. The resistance in Lebanon views itself as a part of the resistance all over the world. The resistance to injustices, to oppression, to occupation, and to this savage attempt to seize the fortunes and the sources of oil of the people. This is what's happening in Iraq. It's all a lie. And you know very well about the media role here. And I was stunned when I knew in a poll that 80% of the Americans still believe that those who made the 9/11 attacks against the United States, they were Iraqis. They believe 12 of them are Iraqis, while they were actually, I mean, you know their nationality, they were Saudis basically. They were not Iraqis. And they believe that they went to Iraq because Iraq has these weapons of mass destruction, which apparently turned to be weapons of mass destruction by the American administration, and that they are going to fight there because they are taking revenge for the 9/11 attacks. Such an ignorance, and such misleading propaganda by the American media outlets. And I would say that an average person in the Arab world is more aware of what's really happening in the world than anyone maybe in the United States. This is a fact, and this is certainly a comparative study that was conducted recently. Another thing about what's happening in the region. This resistance is not against the people. We view the people, we are all preachers and we are all the worshippers of God. And there is no kind of discrimination among religions and sects. If anyone wants to talk about sectarianism, it's the United States that brought sectarianism into the region. You go and ask the Iraqis themselves. They never recognized themselves whether they are Shias or Sunnis before the American war against Iraq. They have always been living together. They don't know anything about this. They have introduced this sectarianism issue and they have been depicting and labeling. I don't want to talk about Hezbollah that is being designated as a terrorist entity. I tell you about our media outlet that has been leveled to the ground by the Israeli aggression. Recently in July, it has been leveled to the ground. The Americans have designated this media outlet as a terrorist entity, and they gave themselves the right to pursue and to attack and to kill anyone who belongs to Manar TV. In one of my instances, I met, I don't know if you're aware or if you know, Alistair Crook and Mark Perry. Does it ring a bell? Mark Perry is an ex-CIA officer, and he is grouping with other people in the conflict forum where they are talking about Lebanon and discussing the things, because they believe that the future of the region is for the resistance movements. So apparently they came and we were interviewing them. When they heard about it, they were saying, I mean, they're making fool of the American people. I mean, do they expect that the TV set would explode in our bedrooms if we turned it to Al-Manar? People has the right to know and to listen and to watch, and then they have enough judgment, I believe, more than Bush and Blair, to see what they can do and what they want and what they don't want. Enough for censorship in this. The last thing that I want to talk about has to do with these kind of congregations that are happening here. I would tell you, in Lebanon, we felt that we are left alone. We felt that we are betrayed. Why? Because even the Arab world, they were not there. Actually, they were conspirating, many of them. And in one of the shows, I've been interviewed extensively during the last war by the CNN and by the BBC. All of the time, I've given more than 500 interviews during the 33-day war. One of these interviews was with Larry King at the CNN, and I told him, listen, Larry, I don't want to go anymore with you. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I came from the southern suburb of Beirut under the heavy 1-ton shells of the Israeli war jets. I went there to downtown to talk to Larry King, the Reverend Larry King, and he was telling me, listen, you've been condemned by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. I told him, congratulations, Larry, good for you. Now you've been preaching democracy, and you want to bring this new religion of democracy to the region, and now you are proud that the despot regimes in the area are condemning a resistance movement. I told him, you know what? Believe me, there is a difference even between the CNN International and CNN Domestic. And I was interviewed by the CNN Domestic apparently with the Larry King live show. I told him, listen, I want to boycott you. It's nonsense. I don't want to go anymore with you in this show because simply you are using me as a tool to legitimize your bias to Israel. You would ask yes or no questions, you decontextualize me, and then you'll say, well, you see, the other voice is there, we're giving them opportunity. And in the meantime, you won't let me say one word. This is the way when you say, Abel, this is your tongue, this is your mouth, and they'll catch you on the tongue. Now, I want to say that we have felt that we are betrayed, but what happened here in this country and in Britain, different places, is very important, is crucial. It's very important because actually, yeah, it was running there in the news bar that there were people congregating and there were people demonstrating in Belfast and in Dublin and in Kirk and in Derry and everywhere. We heard about all of these things, and believe me, the average person in the streets of the southern suburb of Beirut, they were saying the Irish people are with us, we're not left alone. And this is something very important because the governments are trying to demoralize us and you and saying it would not lead you anywhere. You have made a lot of protests and a lot of demonstrations, bringing millions, but still we went into the war. I believe there will be a time when they'll pay for it, I mean, in different means, democratically and peacefully wise, and they'll count a lot before they can go again. And if they want to go again, they make a litany of calculations before they do it. Just to finish, I want to highlight the role of the grassroots and the people. We have to protest, to continue to protest. We have to continue to demonstrate. We have to continue to boycott the Israeli goods. We have to continue to have this interaction together in the different places of the world, because if I tell you about the resistance, it's the resistance of all of us. And when Hezbollah emerged victorious in this war, Hezbollah Secretary General said this is not the victory of the Muslims, this is not the victory of the Arabs, this is not the victory of Hezbollah, this is the victory of the Lebanese, this is the victory of the oppressed, this is the victory of people of honor and dignity who wants to seek peace and who wants to see the fulfillment of that peace as well. Just to finish something that I liked a lot when I read yesterday, it's in the book of Desmond Tutu. He says the following: God calls on us to be His partners, to work for a new kind of society where people count, where people matter, more than things, more than possessions, where a human life is not just respected but positively revered, where people will be secure and not suffer from the fear of hunger, from ignorance, from disease, where there will be more gentleness, more caring and more sharing, more compassion, where there is peace and not war. Blessed is the anti-war movement. Blessed is the Irish anti-war movement. Blessed are the freedom fighters. Blessed are the freedom makers, because they are really the makers of peace in this world. Thank you.
George Galloway. Thank you very much. Richard, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wassalamu alaikum, peace be with all of you. Arming Big Brother, huh? We're really in trouble now. If I'd had arms in Big Brother, I'll tell you. Chantel would have been a widow. Michael Barrymore's return would have been on hold. And I'd be in Wormwood Scrubs. Now, it's with some trepidation, Richard, that I tiptoe into internal Irish politics. It's not right, you having struggled for your freedom and all, for a British parliamentarian to venture too clumsily into these matters. And of course, I have to be honest and say that I don't share the personal feelings, at least, that many of you might well have about Bertie Ahern. I've spent many hours with him at Celtic Park and find him a fine fella, at least personally. Although I must say,
on your own, son.
I'm probably on my own. I never actually do know. I never actually do know who's in the audience, and it is always dangerous. I spoke at the London School of Economics last week, and I made my usual gag. I might as well make it now. That I have no problem with the special relationship between the British people and the people of the United States of America. I just don't want the kind of special relationship that Miss Lewinsky had with the former President of the United States. Unequal, undignified, and with the weaker partner always on their knees. And that got a laugh, as it has here today, until someone put their hand up and said, wasn't it a little cruel, as Miss Lewinsky was sitting in the audience, as a student of the London School. Well, I did what very few politicians do, and made a very fulsome and sincere apology and promise never to say it again. If you're in the audience, Monica, I'm sorry that I brought it all up again. No, so you never do know. who's in the audience, and it might well be that I'm on my own in my feelings about Ahern. Though I must tell you that just before the war, I spent 10 minutes berating him about the disaster that this war in Iraq would be. And at the end of which he said, Jesus, I agreed with every word of that. It was only later that people told me, don't worry, he agrees with every word that says. But it's with some trepidation that I make this point. It seems to me that there's a national illusion, and I say this having been interviewed by the Irish media all this week, a national illusion, a governmental delusion, that anybody in the Middle East is in any doubt about the role that Ireland is playing with Shannon Airport in the massacre of hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq. Yeah. You know, there's only one thing worse than being on the side of that wickedness. It's being on the side of that wickedness while pretending that you're actually neutral. That's actually worse, more dishonest than openly siding with that wickedness. I've told Ahern this personally. I've told the media all this week about it. Don't take the Iraqis for Egypts. They know how the American soldiers reach Iraq, and they know that hundreds of thousands of American soldiers have passed through to and from the war Shannon Airport. So Richard, if you can make the role of Shannon in the war an election issue in Ireland, I'll be over here to campaign for you. Now the title is Bush and Blair's Dirty War. Which one? Where shall I start? Let me start where Ibrahim left off, with the Bush and Blair war on Lebanon. Because no one should be in any doubt that that's exactly what it was. And you know, it's absolutely critical that we get our terms right in discussing this vexed area of the world. I did a quite famous now through the internet Sky News interview with a woman from Sky in Jerusalem, Anna Botting. It's been seen by millions. The interview consisted, as I put it in the interview, with every line on her face, every nuance in her voice, and every loaded question in the interview, departed from the thesis that Israel was a legitimate, respectable member of the international community, and Ibrahim Moussawi and his friends were dangerous desperados and terrorists. That's exactly what they want you to think. But as I tried to point out in the interview, I had just celebrated my 24-year-old daughter's birthday, and on the day of her birth, on the 2nd of August 1982, I had had to rush from a mass demonstration in London to the maternity ward to see her given birth, from a demonstration against the Israeli invasion and occupation of Lebanon. And for the entirety of my 24-year-old daughter's life, Israel has been invading and occupying Lebanon. It's Israel that invades Lebanon, not Lebanon that invades Israel. And it is this inability on the part of people in the media in Britain, but also here in Ireland, to know who's who and what's what, to turn everything upside down, where the victim becomes the villain and the villain becomes the victim. This woman on Sky News knew the name of every soldier from the Israeli army who had been, in her words, kidnapped by the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and the Lebanese resistance in Lebanon. They were kidnapped. Israel captures. Hezbollah kidnaps. Israel holds prisoners. Hezbollah holds hostages. And when I asked her if she knew the name of just one Palestinian victim out of the thousands of Palestinian victims, or just one of the Palestinian cabinet members kidnapped by Israel, or just one of the names of the Palestinian members of parliament that had been kidnapped by Israel, or even the name of the Speaker of the Palestinian Parliament who had been kidnapped by Israel, and are still, all of these people, by the way, are still in Israeli dungeons. Of course, she couldn't name one victim, but she knew the names of every Israeli soldier. Telling you, if you needed told, that for the powerful who rule the world, the blood of Israelis is more valuable than the blood of Lebanese and the blood of Palestinians. That's the truth of it. And we must understand it if we are to deepen our ability to win political advance on these questions. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. James Connolly, who lived in the same street as me, was a freedom fighter, not a terrorist, although the English called him a terrorist. Ibrahim Moussawi is a freedom fighter. Nasrallah is a freedom fighter. Hezbollah are freedom fighters. Talked about Shannon. Blair used our airports in Scotland and in England to transport illegally used weapons of mass destruction from the United States to the Israeli Air Force to slaughter people in Lebanon. Blair at the G8 in St. Petersburg, as they call it, at the European Union, and in New York at the United Nations, did everything that he could to block the demand for an immediate ceasefire. Every aircraft that slaughtered the Lebanese, every rocket that it fired, every bomb that it dropped, every cluster bomb, 1 million cluster bombs in the last 72 hours, when the ceasefire was already agreed and waiting to be implemented. 1 million cluster bombs left as landmines now in the orchards and the fields of South Lebanon, where the farmers have to choose between leaving their crops to wither on the vine or risk their legs or their lives by going forth into their fields. Every bullet, every rocket, every bomb, every aircraft was given to the Israelis free of charge by George Bush and the United States of America. Billions of dollars every year are given by the United States to the terrorist state of Israel. That's why I say the war on Lebanon, which transfixed so many around the world, was a Bush and Blair war, just like the other wars to which I shall now turn. You know, I have sometimes a real problem getting people to shift their eyes or broaden their vision from Iraq, which is necessarily the biggest story in Britain and has been for the last 3 years and will be for a very long time to come, to see what's happening in Afghanistan, one of the poorest countries on the earth. The Afghan people did nothing to harm the United States, to harm Britain. There were no Afghans on those aeroplanes on 9/11. No Afghan ever harmed any interest of the United States or of Great Britain. And yet, in 2001, massive violence was delivered by the richest and most powerful countries in the world on the poorest, most ragged people on the earth, living in mud huts. Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Blair, on one of the anniversaries, asked us to remember those terrible messages of love and farewell left by those poor American women on the aeroplanes on 9/11, from their mobile telephones, on the answering machines of their families, as if we could forget it. But as I said in the Parliament at the time, just because Afghan women don't have mobile telephones and their families don't have answering machines, it doesn't make their deaths any less obscene than the deaths of the American women. In parenthesis, if you'll allow me, they were bombing Afghanistan because Osama bin Laden was there. But who sent Osama bin Laden there? He was sent there by the United States and by Great Britain, by Reagan, by Thatcher, by Carter. He was paid to go there. And the Afghan people had to suffer his occupation. And now they must suffer all over again because the United States has fallen out with its former agent. But the Afghans are fighting back. And this again is an issue of nomenclature. When you hear on the news that the Americans or the British or the Australians or the Canadians killed 100, 200, 300 Taliban, don't believe them. They're killing Afghans, not Taliban. They're killing Afghans who are resisting the foreign occupation of their country and will do so until they are victorious. Believe me, even Alexander the Great did not successfully occupy Afghanistan, and Mr. Blair is no Alexander the Great. So on the subject of Alexander, in a holy country like this, let me just say, in St. Augustine's book, City of God, he talks of the encounter between Alexander the Great and a pirate captain at the high seas. Ordering the pirate to stop, Alexander demands, Jesus, I've come a long way for this.
Give me a bit longer.
Alexander demands, how dare you terrorize these waters as a thief? And the pirate captain answers, how dare you terrorize the whole world? You with your great navy can call yourself an emperor and can call other men as you please. Isn't that the world we're living in today? Yeah. These self-appointed emperors have the gall to describe other people as rogue states, as terrorists, when they preside over the biggest rogue states and are the biggest terrorists in the world today. That's the reality of the world in which we live. Well, I don't have time to say what else I was going to say, so I'll have to speed through it. This is the 50th anniversary this weekend of the British, French, Israeli invasion of Egypt. At the dispatch box in the British Parliament, Anthony Eden said, "Who will chain the mad dog of Cairo?" As it turns out, he was the one that was mad, up to his eyes on Purple Hearts this morning. But of course, the British have been demonising the leaders of the people who stood against them from time immemorial, from the Mahdi through to today, to Nasrallah and others who are routinely described as mad dogs. But you know, I make this point again with some trepidation. I said it in America last September to the significant number of people, and they may also be significant here, who believe that they have some right somehow to decide who the leaders of countries that we are invading and occupying should be. You know, when Connolly and Pearce and the others seized the post office not a few hundred yards from here, the Bloomsbury set, the Fabians, the progressives in London didn't approve, you know. They said, these revolutionaries may be striking against the British Empire, yes, but they are Gaelic, Celtic, obscurantists who, if they succeed, will take Ireland off into the mists of some Gaelic brigadoon. But they missed the point that the Irish revolutionaries did not require a certificate of authentication from the Bloomsbury Group in England. The only certificate they needed was the certificate of authenticity from the Irish people. All that was required of the British left was to decide whether they were with their country's illegal occupation of somebody else's country, or whether they were going to stand with the occupied people's right to free themselves from foreign domination. That's where we should be. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Palestine, in Lebanon, and everywhere around the world.
I've been asked two questions. I'll address the first one, which has to do with Manar TV. Manar TV is continuing to broadcast and is seeking every way to come back to Europe, because you know that it has been banned, and it's the issue of the designation. It was designated as a terrorist entity by the United States simply because we are able to show the Israeli daily atrocities on Palestine and on Lebanon. So this is something that they are trying to prevent people from doing. The second question that I have to address, I should admit that the Israelis, they were pretty expert in misleading the people when they talk about anti-Semitism. This is all over. They talk about Holocaust, anti-Semitism. These are the things that would slap us on the face and the whole world when it comes to certain things. The Arabs are Semites themselves. They are not anti-Semites. You cannot be against yourself. The people, they don't go and study the history, and we can simply say whatever we want to say in the media, and it go unnoticed sometimes, and people would believe it for so long time. And I believe we all know a lot of myths that go around, in every country and every place. The other thing, it has to do with the issue of funding that our brother in humanity there was asking about. I mean, I want to answer him this way. Israel receives more than 15,127,000 US dollars each and every day of the calendar year. They use it to kill children from the United States of America. They use it, the taxpayers. And I would recommend that you would please go and to the www.ifamericansknew.com. It will tell you a lot. They are American group. The www.ifamericansknew.com. It will tell you a lot about these kind of things that the Israelis do to mislead the people. Where do you get your funding from? It's a crime. Oh my God. Where do you bring your arms from? Well, I'm a resistance movement. I want to look after myself. The international community doesn't give a damn. Israel is the invader, is the aggressor, is the occupier, is the children killer, is the massacrer. I'm resistant. I'm a freedom fighter. I have to support myself. I'm ready to take money from Ireland, from France, from Britain, from anyone who supports the human right and my right to exist. It's America that's funding the Israelis to go with this high-tech and superpower to do what it wants. So I don't believe that it's any people's right to ask me where do I bring my arms from or where do I bring my funding from, as long as I'm supporting myself, I'm defending myself. I believe it's everybody's. It's a human being. It's mankind's duty and right to resist for your right and to support those who are resisting for dignity, right, freedom, liberation, protection, and independence. This is what's happening.
George Galloway. Chair, I can't do justice to all the points that were made in the time that we now have available, but I want to link the question from Bilal with the remarks made. They weren't really a question, they were smears really, by our brother in humanity, as Ibrahim called him at the back. You know, it would be much easier, Bilal, if it really was only a problem of making the Americans wake up to the reality of the Zionist lobby in the United States. That would be a comparatively easy matter. If it were really true that the Americans were misled by the Zionist lobby into supporting the policies that they do. I have to be very firm on this question, and I hope I don't hurt your feelings. It's not America that works for Israel, it's Israel that works for America. Israel is carrying out the policies it carries out at the behest of and on the orders of the United States of America and the political and economic system that the United States represents. In other words, Israel is a servant of imperialism. It's not that imperialism is being misled by Israel, and that if only we could change their mind, make them waken up, that they would see things differently and do things differently. Israel behaves as it does because it's carrying out the orders of the United States, which are to keep the Arab world divided and weak. That's why Balfour made his declaration on behalf of the British Empire in the first place. They wanted to impose a settler state. Does that sound familiar to anybody? To insert settlers into the Arab world, to divide them and to keep them weak so that they could be occupied and robbed. That's what imperialism does. It's what it did then, does now, will do if we don't stop it in the future. It is a baseless slander to describe the liberation movements struggling to recover their land and to defend themselves from Israeli aggression as anti-Semitic racists. And it's an equal baseless slander to, by association, accuse us. We are the anti-racists in Ireland and in Britain and across the world. We have spent our whole lives fighting racism, so how could we be anti-Semitic, which is a form of racism? And we reject that charge utterly and completely. Now, No.
It's an easy question to answer. Al-Manar broadcast yes or no the protocols of Zion.
Well, the answer is no. The answer is no. The answer is no. It's a baseless slander. Just like your slander, the Ahmadinejad called for the Jews to be wiped off the face of the map. Well, I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. Though you've had quite a good outing here. I'm coming to that. Ahmadinejad never called for the wiping of Israel off the face of the map. As a matter of fact, Iran does not have the means to wipe Israel off the map, but Israel has the means to wipe Iran off the map and every other Muslim capital in the world. Iran has no nuclear weapons, and Israel, we know, thanks to the brave Jew Mordechai Vanunu, who spent 18 years in solitary confinement for telling us, hundreds of nuclear weapons, many of them targeted at Iran. And thirdly, the only country that's been wiped off the map in the Middle East is Palestine, and its people scattered to the four winds by Israel. Now, I'm sure, Richard, that there is great joy in heaven at the repentance of Mr. Kevin Myers.
I'm Palestinian from Gaza, okay? We will wipe Israel and we will take our land back.
The Kevin Myers apostasy has been joined, funnily enough, on the same day by neocons all over the United States. Richard Perle, the Prince of Darkness, tells us that if he'd known then what he knows now, he would have asked the Iraq project to be put in the drawer marked not possible. I am not St. Francis of Assisi, and I harbour the no doubt unchristian thought that when Kevin Myers and Richard Perle tell me they made a mistake that killed 655,000 people, instead of putting a crown on their head, I would like to put a noose around their neck. Because these were not innocents that were misled. They were the people doing the misleading. They're the people. The media was as much a part of this massacre as were the Marines or Bush or Blair. I can see Richard's looking at me anxiously. I just want to make one last point then, if I may. I've just published a book on Fidel Castro, so she was right to ask me to comment on the Miami 5. I would like the anti-war movement to include the presence of terrorism in Miami against Cuba into their argumentation, because it does illustrate the absolute hypocrisy of the United States when it talks about terrorism having harboured anti-Cuban terrorists in Miami, Florida for the last almost 50 years. Now, I've been accused of many things in my life, but practicing jolly hockey sticks is definitely not one of them. And the person who asked it was wrong. The anti-war movement in Britain is a mass anti-war movement of millions of people, precisely because it seeks the broadest possible support for the strategy and tactics that it employs. That's not to say we're against smaller groups of individuals practicing civil disobedience here and there. All we ask is that they do not practice civil disobedience of a kind that actually alienates the mass of the population whose support we're seeking to gather. And I'm sorry, my friend, sitting down and stopping the traffic in London will not actually do much to stop the war in Iraq, but it'll piss off millions of people in London whose support for the anti-war movement we want to garner. So don't ask us to give up what you call our jolly hockey sticks, which takes a lot of bloody organising and hard work, let me tell you. Don't ask us to give up our jolly hockey sticks for the much easier job of sitting down in front of the traffic in London. See, it's hard to get millions of people to march. It's easy to get 100 people to sit down in a street. But I happen to think that millions are more important than small groups blocking the traffic in London. We had a similar request recently that we should block the bridges in London to stop the Christmas shoppers getting to Oxford Street. I mean, I don't know if the people who suggest that such things are actually working for Blair, but certainly if we block the bridges and stop the Christmas shoppers in Oxford Street, it would be a setback for the anti-war movement, not any kind of victory. Thank you very much for coming in such a